Thanks for joining.
Of course.
We had so much amazing feedback from your talk last week, and this one is a nice segue into that as well. A lot more about mental strength, mental energy, mental focus, and I think you and Rebecca would be great to get to know each other. So happy to have you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just take a quick second to welcome everybody and welcome my dear friend Rebecca. It's a Friday. It's our fourth session. It's Mother's Day weekend. So as a mom, I'm gonna just put a little plug in there to gentle reminder to all of you to find a moment to give your mom a second of your day on either today, tomorrow, this weekend, but let her know she's important to you, or a special woman in your life. Because I know all of us don't have the grace of our mothers being present here on this earth. So if there's a special woman, a special human in your life, take that moment in honor of her. Thank you, Rebecca, for being here with us today. We're so excited to have you. Rebecca and I have another one of those serendipitous moments where we both worked at Lilly, but not at the same time. We both think about things that deal with the topics regarding Rise and Thrive, and how Rebecca's built her company on the notion of mental mindset and strength. And when we got on a call, I think it would have been last fall, Rebecca and I just found that we had some really cool chemistry. So we've just kind of kept a really casual, informal conversation going. We've checked in with each other. We'll send each other texts. We've never officially met face to face, if you can believe that. So we worked for the same firm for years, but never officially met face to face. But that is going to change as soon as COVID-19 allows us to do so.
Amen. Amen.
Right? That's our plan. But I wanted to just read a little bit. I'll kind of go off script, but I wanted to just kind of read a little bit about her bio and then give Rebecca a moment to address us together. Rebecca's organization is here to ban burnout. She's here to build community and boost business. Her focus is high achieving women, and we'll extend that to athletes and humans today, high performing humans. To move from striving to thriving. So I'm very curious to have her articulate the difference between striving and thriving. She's hardwired for intuition and the ability to summarize complex human challenges. She's here to partner with us and see us intentionally reflect and build a community. We're going to be here to be joined by her passion for context and her ability to be a part of thought leadership that allows us to engage from a early career professional perspective, a entrepreneur perspective, frontline leadership perspective, boardroom perspective. She brings that diversity of experience and insight to us today. So welcome, Rebecca, to our fourth athLEDA Foundation virtual coffee. And thank you for coming.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here. Glad to be here. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So as Jelena said, I have a company called wethrive.live, and the predominant focus is high achieving women, but I work with dudes, so we're equal opportunity around thriving. What I want to talk about today is really setting up the difference between striving and thriving, because we've been using the word strive. Hang on just a second. I have a slide issue already. Hang on. Okay, here we go. We have been using the word strive as a moniker of success for as long as I can remember. And as I was doing some research for a project one day and looking at this idea of thriving, I landed on this definition of striving, which comes from the word strife, which means battle and conflict. And as I dug into it a little more, I started looking at the difference between what I had experienced in my career and what so many of my clients were experiencing, and what I wanted them to experience, which was thriving, and it was way different. And what I had uncovered was that striving is really about some external factor to validate our success. So you think to yourself, when I accomplish that goal, I'll feel good about myself. When I get that promotion, I'll feel good about myself. When I hit the sales award, I'll feel good about myself. And it was always something that was out there. And life really felt like a battle to get to that next stage of validation or success. And if I look back on my career before I started doing things differently, my life really did feel like a battle. You know, I achieved tons of sales success. I sold $35 million while I was raising a family and doing all the things, but there was so much of it that really felt like a battle. And so I made some significant changes. And now what I'm able to do and help my clients be able to do is to thrive. And thrive is different. Thrive means to grow, prosper, and flourish. So thrive isn't some airy-fairy woo concept. It is an active pursuit. So to grow means we are going to have to take action in this. Prosper, I want to have a thriving career where I make good money and I'm rewarded for my efforts. And the word flourish actually comes from floral origins, and it means when the stem of a flower reaches up towards the sun and its roots down through the soil. So in order to thrive, the recognition is that we have everything we need within us to thrive. And it's up to us to create the conditions by which we can grow, prosper, and flourish. And by creating the conditions within us, and I believe Eric talked about this last week. I'm sorry that I was unable to make it. I think we probably do have a lot of connections here. We're going to start with the things that are in our brain. Now, there are 3 keys to thriving: story, money, and rhythm. We're just going to talk predominantly today about story, because story starts in our brains. So our brains process information as a story. And every single day when we wake up, our brain has one job. It wants to make sure we survive and thrive. And there are key steps along the way that our brain is really looking for us to thrive. And if we can acknowledge these things and move away from this striving aspect that it's something out there, and instead acknowledge that we already possess what we need to thrive, then we can really focus on those things that can give us the growth that we so desire. So the key words that I want us to hone in on are reflection and connection as it relates to the story of thriving that we are writing for ourselves. We're in charge of writing our own story. And the 2 words, reflection and connection, are going to summarize a lot of things that are on this next slide that we're not going to have the time to go into in depth today, but always center back to the reflection. So when you wake up, this is what your brain's looking for. Your brain's saying, okay, let's start with the basics. Let's make sure we've got food, water, and shelter. Let's get the basics covered. Just above that, our brain is saying, you know what, we need to feel safe with our thoughts and our emotions, what's called psychological safety. Can I truly belong? Can I be myself? Then it wants us to use our unique gifts, talents, and abilities. And then that's the reflection aspect of what our brain needs for us to do to thrive. Then we move into connection. The kindest thing that we can do is to serve another with our unique gifts and talents. And as we continue to do that, we start to really uncover the essence of our meaning and purpose in life. So I'm going to really just distill this down into three key areas that we need in order to thrive. The first one is to recognize that we're all a little afraid. There's always this kind of check in our spirit. There's always this thing that wants to hold us back. But I want to get really clear on what it is and what it isn't. Because we've all heard, everything we want is on the other side of fear. And we use this term fear, and I used it here really as a connection point because it's so familiar to people. But the word fear is only the appropriate word if we're talking about physical and imminent danger. So if there's a tiger in the room, you should be afraid. But really, what we're mostly dealing with isn't physical danger. It's uncertainty. It's that space between where we are and where we want to go, and all of the blanks that exist in that path. And because our brain processes information based on a story, our brain can't leave blanks. It wants us to fill in the blank with something. So anytime we're getting ready to make a change or take a chance in any aspect of our lives, our brain has this space that says, I wonder what's going to happen. We should fill in the blank and anticipate what we think is going to happen. Which is why you can read this, right? Our brain fills in the blanks based on other stories that already exist in our brain. Because you know how to read, your brain fills in the blanks and reads this for you. So our brain is always calling upon other stories that we have, experiences that we've had, articles that we've read, TED Talks that we've watched, classes that we've taken, people's experiences that we've known. Our brain is constantly searching all of these stories that are up there, and some of it we're not even conscious of anymore, and it's starting to fill in the blanks whenever we have uncertainty. And I'll relate this to our situation now with COVID. One of the things that makes this really, really traumatic for our brains is we've never been here before. We've never been in this situation. So we have nothing to call upon in how to handle it, which means our brains process it as trauma. And that's why we feel so taxed and we feel so tired. But uncertainty is a part of our lives, will always be a part of our lives. And so we start to develop this inner dialogue with ourselves. And I prefer to just personify it, and I call it the little bitch that lives in our head. And so anytime we're faced with some amount of uncertainty, often it's that little bitch in our head that starts to give us things that, oh, I don't know if we should do that. You probably shouldn't say that. You're not going to try that, are you? And at its very basis, some of that internal dialogue is meant to keep us safe. You may have had an experience where you've started to enter into a room. I know I had an experience where I was traveling and I got up early to go run at the park. There was this little voice inside of me. It was early in the morning, barely daylight, that said, you shouldn't run here today. And as I got back in my car to go back to the hotel to get on the treadmill instead, there was a car parked kind of off to the side. And I, to this day, believe that that voice in that moment did keep me safe. But too often, that little bitch in our head is just keeping us from doing the courageous things just because we haven't been there before. So I say, you know what? Let's personify her. We're always going to live with her. We can't out-career her. We can't pay her off. She's always going to be there. So best just put her in the passenger seat or the back seat with a seatbelt and a snack and say, you know what? You don't get to drive. You can sit with me, but you don't get to drive. So the first step in thriving is to recognize, in order to get where we want to go and have the life that we want to have, dealing with uncertainty is one of the first steps required. Blair, I'll let you just give me a shout out. Is there anything in the comments that we want to address thus far?
Not as of yet, but for those of you who've joined us in the last few minutes, please feel free to chime in on the group chat, and I'll bring that to Rebecca's attention.
Yeah, please. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, anything as we go along. So as we're dealing
Rebecca,
with, go
this
ahead.
is Jelana. I wanted to ask you, so when did you realize the little bitch in your head existed? Like, at what point in your growth, in your experience, in your journey, did you recognize her? And wouldn't it have been amazing if you would have recognized her for who she was earlier in life? I think that's a part 2 question, but yes.
Yeah,
that's my question.
Absolutely. I realize now, looking back, that she's always been there. She's always been there. And now my goal is to make people aware of this, aware of her as early as possible, so that you know that it's normal, it's okay, and it's a part of the deal. I didn't recognize it as what it was when I was dealing with it. And it would have been, as you said, it would have been a whole lot easier early in my career to have this understanding, because while I've had immense amounts of success, on paper, it doesn't look like I should have had that kind of success. You know, I grew up on an acre of land on my grandfather's farm in Midwest in Indiana. And when I arrived at a place of success to where I was sharing the stage with Stephen R. Covey, one of our greatest thought leaders in the world, when I was traveling the world, teaching and doing things, there was always this part of me that said, you don't belong here. You don't belong here. Yeah. Because I had never known anyone growing up that had done any of the things that I was doing. And so my brain, it took a long time before I settled into my own gifts and talents, because I had never experienced anything like I was doing before I was doing it. So it was all beautiful. A bit weird.
Yeah, it is. Weird. I know we did a study at Lilly a few years ago, and I think we coined that term imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Like when you believe that you're walking around and the success that you've found, or the talent or the skills, or even as an athlete, you know, the abilities that you were given as a human, are somehow you're faking it, and it's not deserved, and it's not honored, and our authenticity is stifled by, you know, wait till they find out who the real me is.
Absolutely.
And so I think what you're describing here is exactly what I wish I had known much earlier in my life. Hence why I think it's so important that we share this with our up and coming leaders today. So
absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely.
Excited. Excited to hear more.
I remember one of the things I was asked to do during the height of my sales success. I was with the Franklin Covey organization for many years and was one of their top salespeople. As I said, I sold $35 million worth of products and services for them. And so I was asked to go and speak to one of the teams. And so I flew to California, and I walked in the room and told everybody all about, you know, sales pipeline and fill in the funnel and value propositions and all the corporate speak BS that, you know, we do in our organizations, right? And finally, I opened it up for questions. And one of the questions, I don't remember the exact wording, it was something like, how are you able to continue to meet the kind of goals that you have every year? How do you continue to have sales success when your goals get so big every year? And I thought about it for just a moment, and I thought, I'm just going to tell them what I really feel. And I said, I'm afraid every single day. And it got really quiet. And I thought, oh shit. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe that was a little too much vulnerability, but I've always erred on the side of telling it all. And then all of a sudden, the room was filled with this collective sigh of thank goodness. And then the questions really started to come in. Then people would, really? You're afraid? I thought it was just me. How are we, now we're collective, right? How are we going to get past this? How are we going to deal with this? And to answer your earlier question, Jelana, I think that now that it's, okay, there was a story in my brain that came up here when I needed it. I think that was the moment when I recognized this little bitch in my head was a thing, because everybody had it. And up until that point, I thought, well, it must just be me because I grew up, as a redneck on a small farm in Indiana and didn't have any business being in these rooms, right? And not so ironically, I have a podcast now, but the very first episode of my podcast was called Top Performer Fraud. And it was I interviewed one of my colleagues, and it was all about this conversation of what's going to happen, the little bitch in our head feelings of what's going to happen when everybody finds out that I'm not as good as they think I am. And so dealing with this is a key part of getting to the levels of thriving that we really want, and enjoying our successes and not looking for the reasons why they probably shouldn't have happened. All right, so that brings us to this point of not everything that we think or believe is actually true. So some of the thoughts that come into our brain, we need to use a little more discernment to validate whether they're true or not. So if you've had a significant level of success, and yet you're feeling this imposter syndrome and this little bitch in your head is being really loud, we have the ability to go back and say, no, but really, I did that. And I'm proud of it, and it's good. Because our brain is always assuming. And you know what happens if we're not careful when we assume, right? If you circle the first 3 letters, the middle letter, and the last 2 letters, that's what happens when we assume sometimes. But we also have the opportunity to assume the best. We can assume that everything is going to work out as it should. So if our brain is going to fill in the blanks anyway, we might as well expect some good stuff to happen. So when we fill that space of uncertainty with optimism, our brain doesn't know the difference between fact and fiction. And so it starts to spark emotions that are positive. You start to be expectant that things are going to work out really, really well. So we have that choice in that space of uncertainty, that we can choose catastrophic doom and think everything is going to be a disaster, or we can fill the space with courageous optimism. And research shows that optimism proves itself really well, both in our emotions as well as our paychecks. And so I know as athletes, visualization and optimism have likely been a part of your practice in the sport that you are proficient in. And so I'm inviting you to now take that same practice of optimism and place it into this next step in your lives, whether it's business or whatever you're choosing to do. Is gratitude. Studies also show that you can rewire your brain for optimism by practicing daily gratitude. So filling the blank of uncertainty is up to us. And the way that we do that, our words matter. How we speak to ourselves matters a lot. When you look yourself in the mirror in the morning, I want you to be kind. I want you to treat yourself like you treat your best friend or your brother or sister or a loved one, because our brains believe what we tell it. And if we look in the mirror and say, you're such an idiot, or I can't believe you do that, or I'm so fat, or I'm so this, whatever we say to ourselves, our brain responds in kind. So if we say, I'm so stressed, our brain's like, dump the cortisol, she's stressed. And then we have the byproduct of that to deal with. And it's not an easy practice, but it is absolutely possible. And it's another thing that, Jelena, I wish I would have done sooner, is to be kinder to myself. Thoughts, questions about this idea of uncertainty and how to fill the blanks?
So Rebecca, this is Jelena again. I saw that Ashan affirmed what you said and said absolutely. so you've got a shout out from one of the guys in the room here. I think what I'm hearing you say, just to kind of lay it out in very simple terms, is the uncertainty can be filled in with gratitude, which then layers in optimism into our psyche. Is that a good formula? I'm just trying to replay what I heard you say.
Yeah, it is. And there, I'm a fan of education. So take what I'm going to say next and with the right intent. There are certain aspects of our educational careers that haven't wired us up for this as well as it could have. So one of the examples is, you remember that feeling you got when you worked really hard on a paper or a project and you get it back and it's just full of like the red pen, what wasn't good about it, right? Mm-hmm. So school, education in general, leads us to believe that there are right and wrong answers for most everything. When the truth is, there are a whole lot of right answers for most of the things that you're going to embark on in your life. But we are scripted through our education experiences to try to avoid things that are wrong. And so sometimes by avoiding the things that are wrong and looking for right and wrong in every situation, we don't put ourselves out there as much as we could or should to really achieve the things that are important to us. Another thing that education does that's not great for us in terms of long-term thriving is we believe that you got to be the old person in the front of the room to be right. And that's bullshit, y'all. Right. It just is. You have a unique, we're going to get to this next, you have a uniqueness and you have gifts and you have talents and you have intuition and you have a lot of greatness that you don't have to wait decades to bring to the world. So there are certain aspects of what has gotten you to this level of success. You've had a regimen, you've worked hard in your education, and you've been given these accolades, and those are amazing. And I want you to carry those with you as reminders that you're badass. But there's some things that you need to let go of, like right and wrong answers for everything, or that you have to be somewhere a long, long time to be good at it. Because our uniqueness is our superpower. Each one of us is hardwired with unique gifts, talents, and abilities. And I know you know this. It's what's made you really great at the sport that you've been in. And a lot of that uniqueness is transferable and to business or whatever you choose next in your life. It is your uniqueness that the world needs. Your uniqueness is your competitive advantage, always. Normal is just a setting on the dryer. when we start to use terms like normal and perfect for human beings, y'all, that doesn't work. We're unique down to our fingerprints. God wasn't into the die-cast manufacturing of humans. This is not an assembly line to the end of it with an inspector that says reject or defect or pass. We are supposed to be unique. We are supposed to be different. So letting go of this idea of normal or perfect frees us up to live and stand tall in our uniqueness. So sometimes in that blank space of uncertainty, we're looking for the right answer. What's normal? What's right? And we can hold ourselves back until we get to the right answer, when in fact, there are a lot of right answers. And the right answer is the one that's right for you much of the time. You know, I hesitated putting my podcast into the world for months, almost a year, because I kept Googling how to do it right. Finally, a consultant said to me, "It's your podcast, Rebecca. Do it however you want." And it was like this, no kidding. Like, what? Why have I been so hung up? And to me, as a high achiever, and I know everybody on this call is a high achiever, it can be a little bit of the blessing and the curse of being a high achiever. Because when you've experienced that level of winning, you don't want anything but that. And so you're looking for, what's the right way to do this? How am I going to be great at it? And in order to get great at something that you haven't done before, you got to be willing to suck at it a little bit at first. Just like the sport that you now excel in, there was a day when you probably sucked at it a little bit. And being able to be okay with the discomfort of learning something new. My first podcast I produced, y'all, it's not good. I was in the closet of my friend's house with a huge glass of wine and this makeshift microphone, just talking shit, trying to figure it out. But you know what? 10,000 downloads later and a lot of really good feedback, I'm getting better at it. I'm still not perfect. I'm never going to be perfect, but I like it. And anything that you like doing, that you have this gut feeling that you might be good at it, is worth taking the risk to not be so great at it to get started. And I'm going to underscore that again, because my first podcast was also called Top Performer Fraud. And you've been a top performer in your sport. You are a top performer in your sport. And to make that jump over to doing something else where you're not always a top performer can be really hard. But it's worth it to keep pushing, because you've got the characteristics to be great. You just apply those now into a different scenario. We're each hardwired with these unique gifts and talents. And the kindest thing that we can do, and our brain is looking for us to be kind in this way, is to give these gifts and talents as a gift. So my top 3 unique gifts and talents. I'm an optimist almost to a fault, but I use it in everything I do. I use it in parenting, I use it in business, and studies show that optimism actually is a key characteristic for success. Another one of my unique gifts and talents is I'm a connector. And Jelana knows this because we had one conversation, and next thing you know, I've introduced her to some people. I can't meet you without thinking about 2 or 3 other people that I think would be valuable for you to meet in your life. It's just how I do things. It helps me. I've been a recruiter. It helps me in business and in sales. And the other unique characteristic in my top 3 is I can take really complex ideas and distill them down into symbols and metaphors that help people process them easier, which makes me a good writer, which makes me a which makes me a good consultant. It's about your unique gifts and talents. Before this clarification, when somebody would say, hey, what are your unique gifts and talents? You might say, I'm a great basketball player. Well, that's a role that you've played, but it's not really your unique gift and talent, then you dig down deeper and you say, what were the things that I did differently in my practice, or that I possess differently than others, that made me a great basketball player or made me a great whatever? Then you can take those gifts and apply them in a multitude of different ways. But it's our uniqueness that matters most. You're not a machine here to produce. You are a beautiful human here to have impact, add value, and be relevant. The industrial of work and education has put us into this idea that striving is what it takes, and that it's going to be a battle, and that we have to produce outcomes. I invite you to take on the mindset that you're here to have impact and add value, because business is human, just like we are human. You're interacting with other humans through all of your business practices. We're not machines. Okay, I want to talk about marbles and puzzles. It's my favorite part, y'all. Let's picture that you have a handful of marbles, and you're looking at these marbles, and they are all round and shiny and perfect. They're beautiful. And if you were to take this handful of marbles and turn it over onto a table in front of you and let them go, what would happen? They'd all roll away. Perfect doesn't stick together very well. But if you were to take a handful of puzzle pieces and you were to look at those in your hand and recognize that each one of them is unique, and they all have their jaggedy ass edges and their dust from the bottom of the box. But if you were to turn your hand over and then intentionally take the time to sort through those pieces and figure out how they each click, 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 and fit together, there are two characteristics of a puzzle once it's put together. One is it's far more beautiful. And the second is it's far stronger when it's together. We are puzzle pieces. We're not meant to be perfect, shiny, round marbles where we've buffed out all the edges and made sure that we don't have any imperfections. That's bullshit. It doesn't work. But when we show up with all of our uniqueness and we say, I've got some strengths, but I've got some weaknesses, and I've had some struggle, and we look at how we can fit together and help each other in the struggle and support each other's strengths and weaknesses, that's the way we were intended to live and work together. Puzzles, not marbles. And when we can see each other for our uniqueness, we can let some of the judgment go, and we can each stand tall in our story for our uniqueness, not in spite of it. The final piece of thriving I want to cover for today before we open it up for questions is nobody thrives alone, y'all. It's just not possible. It requires us to show up with our uniqueness to have real, meaningful connection. Now, connection doesn't just mean being surrounded by people, because I've been really lonely in the middle of a crowded room. I'm talking about the kind of connection where you open yourself up and you allow yourself to be vulnerable and share some of your struggles and your unique challenges in a way that allows you to connect with people who truly see you. Not all the goodness that you brought to their lives, but they see you and allow them to help you, and you reach out in all aspects of your life. You don't want just the ones that are cheering for you when things are going well. You want the ones that are going to reach out and help you when things suck. because your story matters, including the struggle, and especially the struggle. When we open ourselves up and allow ourselves to be vulnerable about our struggles, we expose the humanity in each other and allow us to support each other in a beautiful way. So those are a few of the key points to creating conditions that allow us to thrive, to flourish, and grow. I would love to hear your questions and get some feedback from you today. What are you thinking?
So I want to make sure I'm unmuted. Can you hear me, Rebecca?
I can.
Awesome. All right. So I wanted to ask you, and I really appreciate your time. I love how salient and again, your points of being your superpowers and leveraging them. Most of you on this call, nearly all of you know Shauna, and Shauna has been an incredible member of our community. She is the executive leader of our influencer platform here at athLEDA, and I met Shauna because of Rebecca. So the only reason Shauna is with us on a lot of different levels is due to the fact that when Rebecca and I first connected, she said to me, I need to introduce you to Shauna. So I think that's a beautiful example of how we create a personal board of directors, humans that have a sense of these qualities and are looking to do similar things. And we put that energy out there in the universe, and it just comes back to us tenfold. I'd love for you to reflect on that, Rebecca, and I'd love for others on the call to either chime in on the chat and or ask Rebecca some questions about how you can develop that energy and that personal board of directors when we think about the concept of thriving over striving. But yeah, Rebecca, please react to that, because I think that's such a cool and serendipitous story for the two of us and Shauna.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I put together a group before I had the podcast called a Badass Women's Council. I put together a Badass Women's Council, and people started saying, like, how do I get in? And I want to start one. And I was surprised how often high achieving professionals would say to me, how do I invite people? How do I ask them to join? So still, you know, well into their adult years and multitude years of success, there was still this apprehension to connect. And I think it's really rooted in our uncertainty about being vulnerable. If somebody meets me, what if they realize I'm not all that? What if they realize that I don't have my shit together? But instead, it's easier for me just to recognize that none of us have our shit together. And then it's just a whole lot easier, and the expectations are so much more realistic because we're all just figuring it out to some degree, right? But another thing about this connection piece, as I said, it is a unique gift and talent. Some of mine, some people have it and some people have to work really hard at it. It's worth it. But when in this time of trauma during COVID, so many people would say to me, I feel like I need to do something. And what I always recommend when you're in that state of I want to do something, I want to serve, is give from your place of giftedness. So, you know, some people say, well, you know, everybody's making masks. Y'all haven't sewn since I was a kid with my grandmother. Like, I was not going to start making masks. Like, that was not my thing. But I did care a lot about connection. And so I reached out on social media and just said, hey, if any of you women are sheltering alone during this time, give me your information and I'll mail you a Badass Women's Council t-shirt. Now, that is a simple little thing that I could do, but it comes from my place of gift. I care about connection. I care about people knowing each other. And when I know that people are alone, it breaks my heart. Like, I can't do it. So that's just an example of whatever your unique gift is, you want to serve and give and do more of it. So it's exactly why as soon as I met you, I was like, oh my gosh, you Shauna, you'll totally like I love that
with Shauna. They IU grads. Ashan was a corner for the IU men's football team. Selena is a incredible badass in her own right, and an aspiring attorney. And they have a daughter named Sage. Their question is,
and what's her name? Hey, Sage.
I know, right? So there's Selena, Ashan, and Sage. I wanted to introduce you to them at first.
Yeah.
The question from Selena is,
IU.
Rebecca, right? Yay!
I'm in Indiana, y'all.
Yeah, I love it. Selena wanted to know, how do you handle being in an environment, Rebecca, where you feel like you have to strive instead of thrive? How do you handle being in an environment where you feel like you have to strive instead of thrive?
Can you give me an example or some more context about the question?
So you said earlier, like striving comes from a definition basically to like battle or kind of be against a lot of people to get to your goal. And I feel like in my field, I would have to be with a whole bunch of people where I'm like battling to prove myself, or like it's basically working, because in my field there's a lot of like older white men, and so it's just like me being a minority woman, it's just like, how do I thrive in those environments?
Yeah. And you're working to be attorney, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. So the nature of that, it has some battle in it, right? But meant to serve and for the good, right? So our best option is not to change who you are to fit in and make them feel better. When you show up as yourself, the right people will come into your world to support you. And sometimes you can be in a situation where if you spend too much time changing who you are to meet their expectations, you can wake up and not recognize yourself anymore. And girl, don't let that happen. You got too much goodness to feel like you need to change anything about who you are to fit in. And you will get a great level of well-being as well as paycheck when you stand tall in who you are and what you stand for. Make sure you got good people around you that support you in that, because it's not, I'm not saying there's a magic easy button on this thing. If there was, I'd sell it and make a lot of money. So making sure that you have a good support system in place, some other badass women around you that can keep your head held high when it gets hard, will be a really important part of that.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I think about one of the reasons why Shauna, Jared, Blair, Eric, all of us on this call are here to think about, and a few special folks that have helped us create the concept of community and connection. Part of the mentor program, the concept of having the platform that's powered by Salesforce and being able to get in and find mentors, you know, women and men that are like-minded, you know, are replicas in a certain level, right. In a unique level of Rebecca, can really give us the kind of energy that we need to power through those days, but not come from a sense of force, but from a sense of strength. And I think that's what Rebecca's describing is that we develop our own personal board of directors, and it's not going to be 100 people. Mm-hmm. It's going to be just a few. Those are the folks that really help us manage the complexities and the challenges, because they'll come. But it is from a sense of your own ability to own who you are, love who you are, and love who you're becoming. Thoughts on that, Rebecca?
Yeah, it's great points. I absolutely agree. And I said, you know, find a group, you know, for directors. I'm going to say this with all the kindness and good intent in the world, but not all women subscribe to the same theory. So just because they're a woman in business doesn't mean they're your girl. And some of them believe that you still have to beg, borrow, steal, and strive and fight to get there. And it's just not true. I've done both, and it's just not true. And so you'll have this sense in your gut of those people that are your people that you can trust and that you can do life with. And your gut is usually a really good indication of the right ones. Listen to it. Even if they on paper look wildly successful, whatever it is, when you're eyeball to eyeball with somebody, heartbeat to heartbeat, if you've got any kind of check in your spirit that says, I'm not sure this is it, listen to it.
Other thoughts, questions? We've got the chat open. I know we've got a few other folks. I know Eric's on the line, Shauna's on the line, a few thought leaders here with us, Terry. Just excited to hear what you all have to say. I loved the messaging from Rebecca. I certainly needed this today. I know I did. I needed to take a step back.
Yeah, I'll jump in. First of all, Rebecca, so good to see your face and hear your voice. Super glad for the connection. So I'll just go back to the Selena, the question you were asking. I'm not sure if you're still on, but if not, okay, good. I think, anytime you want to talk about that dynamic that you face as a white female I've had my own experience, making my way through a industry that is very white, straight, male dominated. And so, I think that a lot of what Rebecca said is so true about like, find your network and trust your gut and things like that. And I think, one thing to keep in mind is that sometimes those people that you're gonna, build that network with, they could look like you, they could not look like you, they could be males, females, but they're out there, and I think it's worth you knowing that you can find those support people and you can find those people to have that conversation with you. But I can, definitely understand it is challenging a lot of times, to be in a situation where you are like, I've been the only woman in the room of tons of men, and having to deal with that and the dynamic of that. And sometimes you got to know your audience, and sometimes you have to stay true to who you are, but know who's in the room and how do you have to shift. You'll learn this, but how do you have to shift what you're saying, the way you're saying what you're saying, not the core of who you are, but because of the people who are in the room. And I can imagine or assume, and pardon me for using the word assume, Rebecca, that exactly what I'm talking about because you've had to do that at different times in your life already. And so I think that's where you can look and say, hey, you know what? I've seen this before and I can apply. I know how to walk into a room and stay strong in my core, yet, sort of modify what I'm saying to work with the audience. So it's a similar application of that, I think, when you get into business. But again, not to go down a rabbit hole, but I hope some of that sounds somewhat, I guess I hope it makes sense, and I'm happy to have a chat with you at all and even open up my network to some people who could be helpful to you as you navigate your step forward.
That's awesome. Thanks, Shauna. Shauna was a guest on the Badass Women's Council podcast. Her episode is really good about the difference between striving and thriving. And the other thing about that is, if we want to be respected as confident, strong females in a world full of, lots of middle-aged white men, we have to be strong and confident in ourselves if we want that from others. And so I did a lot of work on my own confidence and standing tall in my own story, so that when I walked in a room, it wasn't in question in my own head before I even entered the room with others.
Hi, this is Terry. I just wanted to add on. Hi, thank you again, Rebecca, for everything that you put out there. It resonates. I think being a female in the industry is difficult. And I could definitely associate with all the white out there and having with them. But I also wanted now to add what you and Donna are saying, that white men out there And as you point out, Rebecca, not all women buy into this. So trust your gut. Don't make judgments on people. Trust your instincts, because you can learn from some of these old white men if they're open, which would be a great mentor or a good lifeline, because they're in that pool of, quote, the men's club. As Shauna said, I've been in a room full of several men, and that's usually where you get some of your best info when you become, quote, one of the guys. And just being yourself and being confident is key. Yeah. Knowing who you are, being able to stand tall amongst men, no matter what color they are, what ethnicity they are, that's really what's key. So trust your gut and be confident. So
I agree. And this is the whole idea of being unique is important. Just owning that uniqueness, owning who you are, and not feeling like you need to be someone else to be successful. That resonates. People feel that from you when you enter the room, saying, you know what, that's who I am. I don't have it all figured out yet, but I like who I am, and this is what I got.
That's right.
I think confidence is like a magnet to people.
It is.
They'll gravitate towards you and want to know more about you. Yep. And that's when you'll be able to shine.
Yep.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And just to add to your point, Terry, about great mentors, one of our first guests, George Reed, whom I believe may have been on the call, may have had to drop quickly, but he was one of my first bosses and mentors, and he was one of the first folks that said, yeah, I want to join, I want to help, I want to empower this group of athletes and high performers that you're working with. I'm all in. So I love the fact that it does take all kinds of folks to do this and make it powerful. So wanted to give that shout out to George.
Hey,
well,
Rebecca,
I know
this is Blair. We're right at a couple minutes past 1. Yeah. I'd love to continue if anybody else has any other questions, but I know that we're right at the top of the hour now.
No worries. If y'all want to stay connected, one of the things I'll offer, my podcast is Badass Women's Council, and 47% of the listeners are dudes. So don't be afraid to listen in.
47%, I love it.
We don't talk about tampons or anything weird. It's all fine. So I would invite you to be a podcast listener. And then for the ladies, I have an online community called the Badass Women's Council .community, where there are a lot of strong professional women there that would be happy to support you.
That's awesome. So let's do this. I try to do this every time we have one of these calls, is send out a response, a reply, some challenge questions. If there's those of you on the line who have additional questions that didn't quite get a chance to ask them, you can send them to me or any one of us here on the athLEDA board, and we'll get them out. Rebecca, we'll send those links to the podcast so folks can listen in, and to the community so we can join it and support what you're doing. We'll also look forward to having you as one of our speakers as we start to launch more athlete experience events across the country. It's something that's been on our to-do list, and you and I have been talking about it for a few months now. So we're going to make that happen, because we're going to be fearless and bold and lead with the best version of who we are.